2 decks down the length of the plane and carrying over 650 passengers. This 1990s proposed version of the Boeing 747X would not only be the biggest passenger aircraft flying in the sky, but it would crush the efforts by Airbus to build their own double-decker jet forever. But the Boeing 747X would never actually be built, with its legend powering rumours about the next Boeing very large aeroplane for generations to come. In today's video, we will look over what the new large aeroplane was, the other concepts that Boeing considered, and why it was never built. Boeing had dreamed of building a pure double-deck aircraft as far back as 1965, when designing the first Boeing 747. Designers at the time repeatedly ran into issues such as where to place exits, how to service the plane with 1970s airports, and even how to load the bags on board. Boeing designer Joe Sutter, the de facto father of the 747, said later that the double-decker 747 was a clumsy airplane that was short and stubby. Boeing would go with a single-deck 747 with a cockpit located in a hump on a second level only because it would allow a front cargo door in the design for future freighter conversions. Passengers on a second deck were only an afterthought. After all, the future of air travel surely belonged to the world of supersonic jets like the Concorde, which was under development at the time. But we're entering spoiler territory for a future video next month, so let's get back on track. In 1993, Boeing would revisit the double-decker design concept. They saw that not only Airbus and rival MD working on double-deckers, but also that air travel growth was growing rapidly across the world. More air travel means more airport congestion and limited landing slots. Those airlines needed an aircraft that could carry as many passengers as possible. Boeing predicted that this market would need a colossal 2,500 airliners with more than 350 seats between 1990 and 2005. And, to be honest, they had the order book to prove it. Its 747-400 plane had got a staggering 382 orders in 5 years, 130 of them in 1990 alone. So Boeing got to work.
I produce a lot of aviation content, and this does make me pretty tired, so thanks to Manta Sleep today for helping me get the absolute perfect nap with their amazing sleep masks. Now, the cool thing is about Manta Sleep is that I actually have bought their products well before they came along to partner with me at Found and Explained.
It actually feels so good. I can't see anything. It's like a blindfold. I feel like I'm being taken to one of those CIA interrogation,
I use them on the aeroplanes. They're fantastic when you've got those long-haul flights going internationally overseas, and I genuinely recommend them as the best product on the market. There's a weighted mask that you can use that's a great sleep, if you want like a weighted blanket feel but for your face. There's a cooling mask that's really good when I get migraines or headaches. So if you want to try Manta Sleep, which I really do genuinely recommend, you can get 10% off by using my code down in the description.
There would be 3 different programs to create the new large aeroplane and a successor to the Boeing 747 program. They would be the VLCT, the Very Large Commercial Transport, the N650, and the LAPD, the Large Aircraft Product Development. The first project would be a joint effort across the Atlantic. Detailed studies of the 500-seat plus market show a demand between 400 and 500 aircraft. Not really to justify billions in development for one company, a lesson that the 747-100 development Boeing didn't want to forget. To bring this VLCT to the market, Boeing was looking at working with a European partner, or one of the companies at the time that made up the very loose firm called Airbus. This partnership worked well for a while, but eventually hit a stone wall when it became apparent that Boeing and Airbus were competing in other aircraft niches and that they butted heads on aircraft design philosophy, such as the cockpit fly-by-wire debate. Their next program, the N650, was started in 1991. It could carry 650 passengers with 18 seats across in economy. It would look very similar to what would become the Airbus A380, with a cockpit on a middle level and designed for the Asian market, where the Boeing 747 was joked as a regional jet. The last program, the LAPD, is possibly the most bizarre and truly deserves its own video. It was a long single-deck monster plane dubbed the 763-241, and it was based on the C-17. The Boeing team visited Lockheed Martin and researched the layout and structure of the C-5, and spent the day crawling over the Antonov AN-124 that was visiting Seattle. And you better sit down for this part. The design that they came up with had a 69-foot tall tail, a 262-foot span, and a length of more than 250 feet. It would carry 450 passengers and feature sleeping berths above the seating cabin. However, the concept had structural issues, and the vast size of the tail and the height of the engines above the ground posed a significant problem for ground support. Overall, these projects came up with 100+ different designs for the Boeing new large aeroplane. A great start, but Boeing had to choose one idea that was cheap, easy to build, and what the market wanted. With the Boeing 747-400 being its best seller yet, Boeing was inclined to follow the direction of upgrading the 747 platform and avoid the costs of a new clean sheet design. And where have we heard that one before? Boeing re-evaluated the passenger requirements down to a more 400 to 650 seater range, with the upper level changing to compensate. Over 3 years, the team worked on the first of the 747X designs, dubbed the 747-500X, the -600X, and the -700X. They would use cutting-edge tech from the Boeing 777 and have a new cockpit. The 747-500X concept featured an increased fuselage length and would carry 462 passengers up to a range of 8,700 nautical miles. The -600X concept featured a greater stretch of 279 feet, with seating for 548 passengers and only a range up to 7,700 nautical miles. There was also a third study concept at the time, the 747-700X, which would have used the combined wing of the -600X but with a wider fuselage, allowing it to carry up to 650 passengers over the same range as the -400. These three concepts were launched in 1996, with Boeing shopping the -500 and -600 models to airlines with a promise to have them in the air within the next 3 years, beating the Airbus A3XX. They were so confident that it would be a bestseller that the contracts with British Airways and United for the -400 signed that year included an option to upgrade to the new models. But using all this new 777 technology proved a big gamble. Next generation technology doubled the development cost of the 747X to $5 billion and also made it no longer share commonality with previous Boeing 747s, pushing away airlines like Lufthansa who had used the 747 extensively. Lastly, airlines were also well aware of the new Airbus A3XX program in the works and were happy to wait until it was released. These versions of the 747X didn't get any orders, and by 1997, Boeing pulled the plug. Boeing's product strategy and marketing vice president Mike Baer said, at the time, "We just could not make a business case for it. The small size of the market meant the money we would have to spend on it just didn't make sense." Flash forward to the year 2000, and Boeing reworked the -400 series into the 747X, avoiding the high costs of the previous versions. There would be two versions, the 747X and the 747X Stretch. The smaller 747X aircraft was to carry 430 passengers of ranges up to 8,700 nautical miles, whilst conversely the 747X stretch would be extended to be 80 meters long or 263 feet and allow it to carry 500 passengers over a range of 7,800 nautical miles. Both would feature an interior based on the 777, and there would also be freighter versions of both of them. But again, with such small improvements over the 747-400 series, this plane concept didn't really win the hearts and minds, and it was put back onto the back burner in favour for more outlandish concepts like the Boeing Sonic Cruiser, which you can see on this channel right here. From here, Boeing would focus on its twin jet business like the 777 and then the future 787. They would also flirt with a concept called the 747-400 XQLR, which stands for Quiet Long Range, which had an increased range of 8,000 nautical miles over the 747, with better fuel efficiency and reduced noise. But it didn't really sound very exciting at all. In fact, you couldn't hear it, especially in a world of increased range of twin jets. All of this research was put together for a final design of the Boeing 747 in 2004, based on the 787 technology and called the 747-8. It wouldn't be a double-decker 747X, but it would have many of the technology and research effort that was used during the 747X development. And from here, the rest is history. Now, I don't want to be a conspiracy nut, but there was a comment on the last Airbus A380 design video that went into great detail of how Boeing used the 747X and New Large Aeroplane project as a ruse to get Airbus to commit to the A380 program. That Boeing was working so hard on their own double-decker program that Airbus had to hurry theirs out the door and beat them to the market. While this would have been brilliant, if not an outrageous 4D chess move, it is rather unlikely as Boeing was spending a staggering $3 million per day on the NLA design team just to trick Airbus. But then again, maybe they were, who's to know? At the end of the day, Boeing made the right call not going ahead with the concept of the NLA and 747X. After all, the writing was on the wall that airlines wanted a plane that matched the range of the 747, but not the capacity. Airlines didn't need a bigger plane, but rather one that was more fuel efficient and had better reach across the globe. An outcome that we can see today with the success of the Boeing 787 and the unfortunate failure of the rival Airbus A380. Make no mistake, whilst I can whip up a nice video, I stand on the shoulders of giants. Much of this video research was based on the hard work of authors such as Guy Norris and Mark Wagner, aviation experts at airlines.net, and secret projects, and other researchers and concept designers that are too numerous to mention. Again, I thank you for making the secret aviation history so accessible to people like me. And if you'd like to support the channel, then we have a Patreon that you can check out right here, where you can see videos early and suggested topics. And if you enjoy this video, then I suggest you subscribe and check out the other videos in the description. And as always, a like and a comment goes a long way. Thanks for watching. In my most recent video, I talked all about the Boeing 747X program, but there was one plane in the series that I didn't mention, an incredible never-built Boeing 747-500 with prop fan engines. It would have an impressive range to go from London to Sydney non-stop and be ultra-fuel efficient. Despite all of these advantages, Boeing never chose to follow through with the concept. In today's video, we will look at what the Boeing 747-500 was, how it improved on the Boeing 747-400, who would have bought it, and ultimately, why it was never built. This mini episode of Never Built highlights a design that didn't quite fit in with the others of my 747X video, but I wanted to highlight it all the same. So make sure you see that one first. You see, the Boeing 747-500 was a design that was going to take advantage of the engine of the future, the prop fan. It was a new take on the jet engine that put counter-rotating props behind the engine and would bring it with a host of advantages. But this story actually starts with another plane, the Boeing 727. At the time, Boeing was also redesigning its successful 727 series with a new prop fan engine in mind. This plane would be called the Boeing 7J7, the J standing for Japanese, and it would have been incredible for the world that was burned by the fuel crisis. It would have a long range and unmatched fuel efficiency, especially against rival plane designs. I've actually done an entire video on the Boeing 7J7 program that you can check out here, but needless to say, the concept was simultaneously cutting edge and also a backward step for aviation. This leads us back to the 747-500. Like the 7J7 program, Boeing needed a successor to the Boeing 747-400, its best-selling version of the jumbo jet yet. Whilst it also had been working on a new aircraft, the N650 and others, including a strange partnership with Airbus, it was also flirting with the idea of taking the prop fan engines and slapping it on the Boeing 747. After all, why not scale up the technology and call it a day, in a new engine option way? Essentially, making a double-decker 747 jet with propeller engines in the early 90s. Let's talk specifics. This 747-500 model would have a range of 8,700 nautical miles, or around 16,000 kilometers. This range would have made it perfect for routes such as London to Sydney, New York to Sydney, New York to Singapore, and Los Angeles to Singapore, and it would have become the 777-8X of its time, and could have possibly been bought by airlines such as Qantas and Singapore. By comparison, the 747-400 could only fly 7,670 nautical miles, or 14.2 thousand kilometers. Boeing felt that the program was very doable, cheap to build, and would result in approximately 10% reduced fuel burn costs on a seat mile basis compared to the original 747-400. The plane would also have a new wing-like structure developed for twin-jet aircraft and a stretched upper deck to accommodate 500 passengers and all their luggage. Boeing planned to introduce this aircraft by the 1990s and was confident enough that airlines would choose it over the existing 747-400. Boeing was targeting airlines like British Airways, Cathay Pacific, Japan Airlines, Qantas, Lufthansa, ANA, and Singapore Airlines as a launch customer. The plane would have been the 747-8 of the 90s. So why was it never built? There were a multitude of various problems with this design, and we'll start with the engines. You see, these prop fan engines were loud and sounded like a chainsaw.
In subsequent tests, the UDF demonstrated its ability to operate at full speed.
And despite efforts by General Electric and other designers, airports and airlines were not convinced that they would be able to make it quieter than an existing jet engine. Plus, this new engine type would insert lots of unknowns into buying the plane, such as the development of the aircraft and maintenance issues, spare parts, and perhaps even an increased cost. The killing blow came when GE and the other designers working on the engine type decided to not go ahead with the production of the engine. And this was a major reason why the 747-500 never went ahead. Boeing would then re-evaluate the design to include one with other engines, the normal turbojets, but there were still some other issues. Let's talk about that market. The plane was created in mind for long-haul routes for operators like Qantas and Singapore, but just two carriers don't make a market for a new type of aircraft. These two airline operators would only possibly buy 10 to 20 units each, leaving Boeing holding the bag with a massive development bill. Boeing had tried to enter this market before with the Boeing 747 SP, a long-range version of the 747-100. They only sold 45 of them to carriers like Iran Air and Pan Am, by which this time were not in the market for any new jumbo jet aircraft. In fact, no one needed the 747-500. The market was saturated by hundreds of the 747-400, and there are plenty of twin-jet designs like the 767 and A300 slowly encroaching on the market. In 1985, the ETOPS rules were relaxed, allowing twin-jet aircraft to fly over oceans. Airlines could now fly smaller equipment like that 767 or A300 and sell all the seats on the plane, or fly 2 daily round trips. They would have struggled to sell the same amount of seats as on the 747-500. With ETOPS expanded yet again in 1988, the need for high-capacity quad-jet to fly a long range simply vanished. The only other place on the planet to fly a plane like this would be Australia to South America, but this market was limited indeed. With no buyers for the type and no engine, Boeing decided to pass on the easy-to-make and sell 747-500 and instead proceed to build the later 747X design, which, as I mentioned at the beginning of this video, you can see on the channel right here, right now. Thanks so much for watching today's quick and mini video. I've had a lot of new people subscribe to the channel and come to check out what else I have going on, and I say welcome. If you have any questions for a video of the future, let me know in the comments. I read everyone and I'd be thrilled to see your ideas. And if you want to support the channel, then we have a fantastic Patreon here where you can see videos early and chat to other fans. Check it out to see what other rewards we have and feel smug that you're helping a little channel grow. Also, a small channel update. Now that I have successfully moved out of the countryside, I'll have better access to the internet and be able to do live streams. What an aviation channel will do as a live stream, I still don't know. But again, maybe you have the idea in the comments. Thanks so much for watching. Did you know Boeing almost pulled the trigger on an unducted fan airliner back in 1992? It would be the successor to the Boeing 727 and replace the Boeing 737, changing short-haul flying forever. Today, it may even be the template for Boeing's next aircraft, the Boeing 797. Let's explore the never-built 7J7. Hey, it's me, Nick here from Found and Explained. If you liked this video today, then don't forget to check out the rest of the channel and subscribe. The 1980s was an exciting time in aviation. Airbus had entered the scene.
The A300 is our biggest new investment.
And rivalry between aerospace builders was entering a fever pitch. On a cool morning in March 1984, Airbus smugly revealed to the world the Boeing 737 killer, the Airbus A320. So of course, Boeing needed something to trump its rival by the Paris Air Show the very next year, and they entered it with an elaborate mock-up of an incredible machine that would only come 7 years later, the Boeing 7J7.
That is 32 inches wider than the Airbus A320.
The Boeing 7J7 was designed for a 150-seater market, already flying thousands of older Boeing 737s, some of which were approaching 20 years old. It also needed to replace the 727 and the McDonnell Douglas DC-9, focusing on domestic routes and pan-European travel around 2,000 nautical miles. Boeing had previously tried to replace the 727 with the Boeing 757, but sales were poor, and it turns out airlines wanted frequency over a bigger narrowbody. Essentially, it was better for customers to have more options of flight times than for the airline to save on airframes. So Boeing needed a new aircraft to fill the gap between the Boeing 737 and the Boeing 757, and it had to do it in a time of competition and high jet fuel prices. Thus, this is why Boeing went for an engine design that was incredibly unique: the prop fan. By having the fans on the outside of the jet engine, Boeing promised jet-like speeds, but for a fraction of the fuel cost, a difference of 60% to the nearest other jet flying back that day. The engine had propellers with 2 rows of blades spinning in opposite directions to reduce losses due to swirl, energy wasted in imparting spin to the air behind the aeroplane. Both would be installed on the aeroplane's tail, not under the wings, to allow room for a proper disc and to keep the noise out of the cabin. This plane would also feature fly-by-wire controls, a glass computerized cockpit much like the L-1011, and high-strength carbon fiber throughout. In its first public design iteration, passengers on board would have been treated to a twin-aisle cabin of 222, with no passenger more than 1 seat from an aisle. The twin-aisle design would cut boarding times by 10 minutes over single aisles and make the aircraft perfect for commuter routes between major cities of a range of 2,700 nautical miles. Boeing would also propose a high-weight version that had extra fuel tanks in the wings and could fly 4,250 nautical miles. To share the financial risks of this $4 billion project, Boeing enlisted corporate partners from 3 different countries. The Japanese, hence the J in the 7J7, had the biggest share of the program, 25%. This was also followed by Saab of Sweden and Britain's Short Bros, who each had smaller stakes. But Boeing was guaranteed that it was maintaining at least a 51% share of the project. Each Boeing 7J7 would have a list price of around $28 million, which today is $67 million. Pitching the design to the market came with mixed reactions. SAS wanted a denser version of the plane with a 2-3-2 seating configuration for economy travelers and was contemplating becoming the launch customer. However, other customers were skeptical as the engine technology was unproven at the time. So why was it never built? The first problem was that the design was constantly changing. Now, you see, this is where it starts to get confusing. In 1986, Boeing proposed a smaller version of the 7J7, seating 115 passengers called the 7J7-110, but then retracted it, switching the concept to its Boeing 737 line. At one point during this year, customers could also choose between a prop fan or a jet engine, but then Boeing cancelled the jet option, recommitting to a prop fan, only to have the prop fan manufacturer reveal delays the very next day, missing the 1992 launch date. By June 1st, 1987, Boeing was approaching its deadline to either make the plane or get out completely. And so far, there were only 3 major airlines that had shown any interest. SAS, who wanted to be the launch partner with a commitment for 100 7J7 aircraft. British Airways wanted 35 7J7s to replace their 737-200 aircraft, and American Airlines wanted 100 units of a stretched version seating up to 170 passengers. It's this stretched version that really threw a spanner in the works of this project. The engine was already at its limit for this aircraft, and Boeing was concerned that it would paint themselves into a corner if an airline asked for an even bigger version of the 7J7 with 200 seats. Until we hammer it down to one size, the 7J7 won't go, said Dean Thornton, president of Boeing Commercial Airplane, back in 1987. In an interview, he said the most confusing part of the decision-making process is trying to pinpoint the airplane's exact starting size. And without knowing where to start, Boeing was not going to go. By December 1987, Boeing paused the production of the aircraft indefinitely. There are also some other concerns about why this aircraft never went ahead. For one, airlines were skeptical that these planes were as quiet as other jet aircraft, with the fans being exposed out in the open. Plus, this plane only flew at Mach 0.84, which is faster than a turboprop, but slower than most jet aircraft today. That 10 minutes saved at the airport would have been lost in flight. And then there is also the curious case of the Boeing sales agent in Germany called Rudi Hillinger, who in the 1980s was in talks with Lufthansa for the 7J7. Allegedly, she threw the plane under the bus in favour for an order of Boeing 737s, not believing in the type and convincing Lufthansa otherwise, making Boeing miss out on a huge order which could be considered an inside job. Lastly, the Boeing 7J7 was made for an era of fuel uncertainty. By the late 1980s, fuel prices had dramatically fallen and the Western world had secured a new oil supply. With fuel now cheap again, the 7J7 didn't really have much of a purpose, and then was never built. Today, we can very much see that the Boeing 7J7 was a precursor to Boeing's next needed aircraft, a twin-aisle, 500 nautical miles range, 200-seater aircraft dubbed the Boeing 797. Had the Boeing 7J7 been built back in the 1980s, it is likely that today we would see a very different market indeed, although one where perhaps even the Boeing 737 wouldn't have been as successful for Boeing. Thanks so much for watching this video today. I hope you enjoyed the very strange tale of the Boeing 7J7, and I can't wait to see your thoughts in the conversation down below. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to subscribe. In 2001, Airbus came to the table with the game-changer Airbus A380. It could fly more passengers than ever before, and it left rivals scrambling to come up with their own ideas. But not Boeing. They had an answer up their sleeve called Project Glacier, or otherwise known as the Boeing Sonic Cruiser. Before we dive right into the Boeing Sonic Cruiser, we need to set the lay of the land and why Airbus and Boeing proposed two radically different solutions to the aviation problem. At the beginning of the 21st century, there was an issue with the aviation industry. Airports could only take so many flights, and landing slots were becoming increasingly expensive. Some airports, like London Heathrow and New York's JFK, actually sold slot pairs for millions of dollars. Thus, if airlines couldn't buy more landing slots, what could they do? The first solution is to increase the number of seats on board planes. The Airbus A380, the biggest capacity passenger aircraft ever built, allowed airlines to fly more seats on routes without increasing slots. Boeing actually saw a different answer. They saw that many of the passengers flying into these airports were flying onwards to other destinations. For example, some of the passengers on a New York to London flight may have actually been trying to travel from Washington, D.C. to Manchester in the United Kingdom. So why not allow more direct flights between these two communities? This would mean less time in hub airports and a quicker journey. As well as wanting more direct flights, passengers have demonstrated a preference for flights that take less time and an aeroplane configuration that enhances comfort. It is just common sense. People want to go where they want to go, when they want to go, how they want to go. Boeing's answer to the demand for faster flights, more direct flights, and increased comfort is the Sonic Cruiser.
The first unveiling of the Sonic Cruiser. Well, what do you think? Is it good?
Thus, Boeing came up with a new aircraft that could operate to these smaller airports, fly there faster, and target a different market segment than the very competitive Airbus A380. So what was this crazy new concept? The first biggest advantage of the Boeing Sonic Cruiser, and its namesake, was its speed. It was designed to be a subsonic aircraft flying just under the speed of sound, around 10 to 20% faster than a normal jet aircraft. This would be around Mach 0.95 and even up to 0.98, which is around 650 miles per hour or 1050 kilometers per hour. There would be no sonic boom, thus no problems, which was one of the flaws that led to the end of the Concorde. Over long distances, this speed made a big difference. A conventional flight between London and Singapore would take around about 13 hours and 10 minutes. With the Boeing Sonic Cruiser, the flight only took just over 11 hours. Going fast would also mean that the Boeing Sonic Cruiser would have to fly at a higher altitude than other aircraft, cruising at over 40,000 feet. This aircraft design would be 250 feet long and have a wingspan of 165 feet. It would use a delta wing arrangement and use canards in place of a tail. The two engines would be mounted on the rear, looking like a Cold War spy plane. It was truly different from anything else flying at the time. The Sonic Cruiser is a brand new class of flying machine. Every other commercial jet airplane has been a further refinement of the Boeing 707, said Walt Gillette, the general manager of the Sonic Cruise program at Boeing, in 2002. It would carry 200 to 250 passengers to a range between 6,000 to 10,000 nautical miles. This was a huge gap in terms of range and was likely because Boeing planned to offer different models depending on the requirements of the airline, such as one smaller but long-range model and a bigger, heavy capacity model that flew a shorter distance. This is something that we have seen echoed with the Boeing 787 and the Boeing 777X program. The Boeing Sonic Cruiser would have been built with an advanced composite of titanium and ceramics. At the time, most aircraft were using a full metal body and were quite heavy, especially Boeing's rival, the Airbus A380. This composite structure would have reduced the airframe weight by around 70% and would have made the aircraft one of the most fuel efficient in the world at the time. Boeing announced the Sonic Cruiser just after the Airbus A380 to try and upstage Airbus and got some early interest from American Airlines and Virgin Atlantic for use across the Atlantic Ocean. I truly believe that this aeroplane will change the way the world flies. We expect to order between 3 and 6 aircraft, said Sir Richard Branson in 2001. Alas, like all visionary projects, there were some flaws with the design. For one, the speed was actually a crutch. Many of the airports actually had a curfew, and the Boeing Sonic Cruiser, using existing slots to fly it, would actually arrive before the airports opened. This would mean an expensive slot readjustment, or the aircraft limited to which airports it could fly to. Unless more runways are built, the Sonic Cruiser is going to struggle because airlines would not have the slots to use the aircraft, said Richard Branson only a year later in 2002. The allure of a faster speed did not sway many airlines as well. While the speed was of great interest of passengers, it was not worth it at the cost of more fuel burn. Additionally, passengers don't really mind an additional 1 to 2 hours in flight, but airlines certainly notice the gas bill. Lastly, timing wasn't right for the aircraft. In 2001, the aviation industry took a big hit following the 9/11 attacks, and demand for the new aircraft, especially an unproven experimental one, fell. But Boeing didn't exactly give up on the concept. They may have not had much interest from airlines, but the research didn't go to waste. During development, they hit a snag with the delta wing design. It made accessing the rear of the aircraft during an airport visit difficult for service trucks and unloading passengers. Thus, Boeing designed a version of the Sonic Cruiser that had a more typical middle wing like we see on aircraft today. With the original concept of the Sonic Cruiser out, Boeing went back to this earlier middle wing design and revised it further. They relabeled it Project Yellowstone, or the 7E7, with the E standing for efficiency. The aircraft would no longer have the sonic speed, but it would burn the least fuel of any aircraft. The 7E7 would then be renamed into the 787 and become the Boeing Dreamliner that we know and love today. The aircraft would be very popular with airlines, operating at least 20% less fuel burn than the nearest comparable model, the Boeing 767-300, and shift the aviation model away from hub to hub and to point to point. 15 years on, we can see which was more successful. The Airbus A380 has been shut down with little to no second-hand market. And the Boeing 787 is still going strong with 972 built and 1,510 ordered. A final footnote is that Boeing actually updated the Sonic Cruiser patent in 2012. This upgrade was based off research done in part with NASA on a future high-speed civilian transport concept to carry 100 passengers close to the speed of sound to around 6,000 nautical miles. Whether or not it will go ahead remains to be seen, but it seems that the dream of the Boeing Sonic Cruiser isn't dead yet. Do you think airlines should have offered faster air travel to passengers? Let me know in the comments. And if you enjoyed this video, consider giving it a like down the bottom so YouTube will pump it up in the search results. Even a single one makes a big difference. And if you want to see more stories like this one, press that subscribe button so you don't miss an episode. Thanks for watching. Boeing has been wrestling with the idea to bring a new mid-sized aircraft to the market, the legendary 797, for decades. Yet they actually designed and offered the perfect aircraft already, the never-built Boeing 787-3. In today's video, I'm going to show you what the 787-3 was, why it was a mistake not to build it, and why now it's too late for Boeing. Let's jump in. Hey, it's me, Nick here from Found and Explained. If you love aviation and other things about never-built aircraft, then hit that subscribe and bell icon to never miss, twice a week, Found and Explained videos. Back in the early 2000s, when Boeing was designing the 787 to be the next true generation of aircraft, they created 4 versions, one less than what we have today. The first was the 787-8 with 242 seats and was to replace the smaller Boeing 767. Next was the 787-9 with the same wingspan as the Dash 8 but longer and able to carry 280 passengers. This aircraft would fit snugly between the 767 and the smaller 777. Last was the 787-10 with 330 passengers, able to replace the smaller 777-200 aircraft. But there is an opportunity gap in that lineup. As many passengers as the 787-9, but without the range requirements, meaning an aircraft that would be effective for medium-haul routes like New York to Chicago, Sydney to Melbourne, or Tokyo to Osaka. This would be called the 787-3. It would carry 290 to 330 passengers in a 2-class configuration up to a range of 2,500 or 3,000 nautical miles, around about 5,500 kilometers. Thanks to its two-aisle design, it would have a faster turnaround than the single-aisle 757 or the larger 737, carrying more passengers and be more fuel efficient for shorter routes, using different blended winglets as opposed to the classic raked wingtips of the 787. The small wingspan would also mean that it could fit into Class D gates, a common occurrence in Asian markets. For airlines, this would be a profit machine no-brainer, or so Boeing claimed. It would also solve the middle-of-the-market problem. The 757, 767, and the Airbus A321 and small A330 each border on the just right Goldilocks gap between range and passengers. With the 787-3 fitting right in the middle, it would seem that Boeing was set to solve the problem once and for all. The 787-3, when it was offered to the market, became incredibly popular in Japan, with both Japan Airlines and ANA snapping up 43 orders. So why did it never go ahead? It all began with delays to the first version of the Boeing 787-8. Boeing had trouble with the materials, software, spare parts market, management of the program, striking workers, their base of contractors making incorrect parts, and even had to do some redesigns to make the Dreamliner work. So much so that the program was dubbed the Nightmare Liner. These cumulative 3 years of delays hit Japan hard, with ANA and Japan Airlines both choosing to switch their 787-3s over to the sooner-to-the-market 787-8s. There were also some flaws with the 787-3 that we should mention at this point. JOA and ANA realized that a 787-8 would be far more flexible in their fleets than the 787-3, and would offer little advantage in terms of economics over the existing 767. This was because the plane had all the features of a 787-8, including the heavy empty weight, but with less power and thus range. The airframe maker also claimed it could reduce the weight of the plane to match, but it was unable to during development. Boeing didn't have the time nor the resources to work out these flaws, and with the main orders gone, Boeing decided to retract the model and seal it away. A quick side note here, if Boeing did make the 787-3 back then we would have also seen Airbus rebuttal with the small A350-800 to compete. A video that we have covered right here. Jumping ahead to recent times, in the market plays a very different picture. Rival Airbus released the A321XLR at the 2019 Paris Air Show, winning not only applause, but many orders from airlines. This plane design had an impressive range and the passenger capacity to match, filling in the lower section of the middle of the market. Because Airbus built this aircraft off their successive A320 platform twice over, the plane would hit the market far sooner than any clean sheet design. Boeing was going to release its own version of a middle-of-the-market plane called the 797 at the same show in 2019. This aircraft would have been cheap to build with a metal body, not composites, and fitted in between the MAX and the 787. It would have sat 220 to 270 passengers, flown 4,000 to 5,000 nautical miles, and with Delta picked to be the launch customer. But problems with the 737 MAX took the headlines, and Boeing was forced to switch tactics away from new product development. A replaced CEO later, Boeing seemed to have cancelled any new plane ambition. But in 2021, the platform has changed again. With travel now limited around the world and demand for flights at an all-time low, many airlines have moved away from larger, wide-body aircraft, an area that Boeing excels in, for smaller, narrow-body designs like the Airbus A320 series. In fact, US carrier JetBlue recently fitted out its fleet of new A321 aircraft with lie-flat business class seats for trips across the Atlantic. Not the first to do so, but the start of a new trend of carriers choosing narrow bodies for roles once dominated by larger aircraft. It's a market that Boeing can't afford to miss. With the Boeing 737 MAX now returning to the sky, Boeing has spoken about their new mid-sized aircraft project, hinting that it will now bring to the market a new aircraft design and offer 3 different versions, ranging from a 200 to 270 seats, with the latter one able to cross the Atlantic for those lucrative European-bound routes, much like the 757 did. Likely this aircraft will be based on the learnings of the 787 and effectively may be a reincarnation of the older 787-3 model, and according to some, this will be a good move. Boeing has a very good record of understanding how the 787 works, where its strengths are, how they can tweak it. What would happen if Boeing were to take the dust off the thing we call the 787-3, let's tweak it, let's take some weight out, let's do some clever stuff with it, and maybe that's our 797. Thus far, Boeing has been very reserved for what it wants to do with this 797 project, as it wants to ensure that it has the right plane, one very different from the current Airbus offering, for the market at the right time. After all, for all intents and purposes, Boeing now has the upper hand, as rival Airbus has already revealed their middle-of-the-market aircraft design. Or do they? As good as this sounds, 2021 is actually already too late for Boeing, and as it turns out, they missed the biggest opportunity in aviation already. One that could have been avoided had they built the 787-3 in the first place. Boeing's biggest enemy today is time. Any next Boeing aircraft design would not reach the market until at least 2030, too long to prevent rival Airbus from dominating the market with their own design. On the flip side, an existing 787-3, if rushed now, would be too weak compared to the newer engine and aircraft technology being developed beyond 2025. The 787-3 would effectively be the perfect jack of all trades, but master of none. While the 787-3 would be superior in airframe composite materials to the A321XLR, Airbus could easily upgrade both the fuselage and engine technology in a blink of an eye, matching or exceeding the Boeing 787-3 or a new Boeing 797. Plus, we also need to keep in mind that Boeing has been suffering for years with the 737 MAX problem, the 787 having production issues, and its stock price has fallen with cautious investors. To spend $20 billion building a new aircraft, one that it can't afford to miss, and that airlines can't afford to order right now, puts Boeing in a difficult position. For Boeing going forward, they need to plug a hole in their lineup, be it an impossibly bigger 737 MAX, a restart of the 757, or a 767 passenger program with the learnings of the 787-3. All of them hard choices with no clear answer, but one that Boeing must make. What do you think? Let me know down in the comments. And thank you again so much for watching today's episode of Found and Explained.
In this video, I'll be showing you the Boeing and Airbus experiment never-built trijet aircraft, including a Boeing 747 trijet design. What were these designs? What would have they been like? And what is the future of trijet aircraft? Let's find out. Back in the 1970s, trijets were all the rage. Lockheed Martin and McDonnell Douglas brought their 2 wide-body designs to the market, the Lockheed L-1011 TriStar and the DC-10 respectively, that filled an important market gap between the Boeing 737 and Boeing 747. For Boeing and later Airbus, this middle market of 250 to 270 passengers for a range of around 5,000 nautical miles was too good to pass up. And even today, it's a market that still draws plenty of interest. You can watch my video on this market here. But they couldn't enter this market with just any normal plane. After all, they had to bring to the market an aircraft that was big enough for all these passengers and could still fly over oceans. Back in the 1970s,
ETOPS rules dictated that an aircraft with only 2 engines could only fly around 60 minutes from the nearest airport at all times. This made flights across the Atlantic uneconomical at best for twin-engine aircraft, and in the case of the Pacific, impossible. Thus, the answer lay in a trijet design, an aircraft that was a wide body but cheaper to operate than the 4-engined Boeing 707. First up to the plate was Boeing. They already had an excellent aircraft platform, the Boeing 747-200, so why not simply remove an engine and make it more economical? Thus, Boeing would go on to study the development of a shorter 747 with only 3 engines, the center engine of which would be fitted in the tail with an S-duct intake, similar to that to the L-1011. The Boeing 747-300 trijet would have several advantages over its competition. It would have been able to carry around 300 passengers to a range greater than 5,000 nautical miles. And thanks to its large design, a freighter version would have had plenty of room for cargo. Boeing would have targeted this aircraft to the transatlantic markets for those airlines that didn't need the flexibility of a larger 4-engine Boeing 747, and to Japan's market that required a high-density Boeing 747 for commuter routes. However, engineering studies showed that a significant redesign of the Boeing 747 wings would be necessary when developing the concept, which would put at risk the idea of maintaining the same 747 handling characteristics to minimize pilot retraining. Doesn't that sound familiar? Boeing decided instead to pursue a shortened 4-engined 747, resulting in the Boeing 747 SP. But Boeing never really gave up on the trijet dream. According to Flight International in 1978, Boeing was right at the cusp of announcing a new trijet design after being pushed to the market by American Airlines. Called the Boeing 777-100, Boeing envisioned this aircraft as a single-deck trijet, much like the Lockheed Martin L-1011. It would retain the Boeing 727 S-bend trijet design, which costs more per aircraft but saved fuel and maintenance over the plane's lifetime. This Boeing 777-100 trijet would fit into a new 1980s Boeing lineup, including a twin-engine Boeing 757 to replace its 727, a twin-engine 767 to challenge the Airbus A300, and the trijet 777 concept for transatlantic travel. The Boeing 757 and 767 both won customers in their early days and got a significant boost when those pesky ETOPS regulations were changed in 1985. With the news that a twin jet could perform a trijet role and new engine technology made a 3rd engine unneeded, Boeing would redesign the 777-100 into the twin-engine 777-200 we know and love today. But what about Airbus? Did they ever consider a trijet design? While the Airbus A300, its first aircraft to the market, was always meant to be a short-range twin-jet, it's actually the tail of the 2nd-generation version, the A330 and A340 series, that gets more interesting. During the development of the A330 and A340, Airbus held discussions with McDonnell Douglas to produce a long-range aircraft together, which would have been designated the AM300. This aeroplane would have combined the wing of the A330 with the fuselage of the McDonnell Douglas MD-11. MD needed a new wing for their MD-11, and Airbus needed an aircraft design with powerful engines. Airbus had initially planned 4 engines for the A340, but couldn't ignore the fuel savings of using 3 engines instead. Alas, this deal fell through after a surge of orders for the MD-80 and MD-11 in 1988, with McDonnell Douglas deciding to go their own way. But this story will have to wait for another day, so subscribe if you want to find out more about this lost history of Airbus and McDonnell Douglas. More recently, in 2008, Airbus has revealed a patent for a trijet double-tail design. It looks very much the same as an Airbus A320, but actually has a split tail that has a third through engine mounted on the end. This concept tackles the problems of a trijet head-on, with 3 smaller engines able to beat a twin-engine plane on fuel efficiency. And the tail design means that it is much quieter than other aircraft. Whether or not Airbus sees this as the future concept for the Airbus A320 series remains to be seen, but more likely it's a patent to prevent Boeing from following through with their own version of the concept. Today, we still see some trijet designs on the market, although not for mainline commercial aircraft. Many supersonic aircraft have adopted a trijet design to either accommodate noise requirements, such as the Spike 512, or simply because they can't get enough power to move faster than the speed of sound. Alas, the trijet design may never make a true comeback, and just like how the trijet led to the downfall of the 4-engine aircraft, it seems the very same has happened with the introduction of twin-engine aircraft. Thanks so much for watching today's episode. I love making these videos, and it's through you viewers, yes, you watching right now, for making this happen through likes, comments, and subscribing to my channel. I can't wait to see you on the next video, and have a great day. No other aircraft has been more controversial than the Boeing 737 MAX. On one hand, it is seen as the latest generation of one of the world's best-selling aircraft, and on the other, a terrifying hubris of the too-big-to-fail aviation industry. With its return to service only a beat away, with American Airlines scheduling its first flight for December 29th, should you choose to fly on board the Boeing 737 MAX? The long answer is far more complex. Thanks for tuning in. If this is your first time on the channel and you like what you see, then consider subscribing. For those who are out of the loop or are new to aviation, you may not know what's up to date with the Boeing 737 MAX. The Boeing 737 MAX is the 4th generation aircraft of a very popular 737 series that brings some of the latest technological developments to the market. It has a lower fuel burn than ever before, impressive performance, and modern cabin comfort. However, and this however comes with all the weight that I can possibly say on YouTube, in Boeing's haste to update the Boeing 737 series for the future, and beat rival Airbus in their own A320neo, the 737 MAX has a significant flaw in its design, a flaw that ultimately led to 2 fatal crashes and buried the aircraft in tragedy. For over a year since those 2 events, Boeing and the FAA have worked tirelessly to address the issue and come to the market with what has been called a simple fix to get the aircraft flying again. Although a long process, Boeing and its customers are confident that the issue has been resolved and passengers can be comfortable flying on board their MAX aircraft again. Part of the changes are limiting the MCAS autopilot system to only activate a single time during flight, not repeatedly overriding the pilot, and implementing 2 autopilot sensors instead of 1. So far, the FAA has recertified the type, and other aviation administrations are performing their own independent tests to follow suit. Once the type has turned to active duty, airlines will then retrain pilots to fly it and to be different of its flight dynamics compared to other aircraft in the series. But the question remains, as a passenger, should you fly on board the 737 MAX?
First things first, let's buckle those belts.
There are several different ways to answer this question. For one, the aircraft will be the most scrutinized plane of all time. No one plane has been gone over with a fine-tooth comb by as many experts across many different government departments, aerospace firms, and industry regulators than the Boeing 737 MAX. Whether or not this so-called comfort remains to be seen, but many people have put their faith in the design outside of Boeing and outside of the aviation industry's vested financial interest. The plane is also well tested. During the recertification process, the plane has now completed about 1,400 test and check flights and more than 3,000 flight hours. In short, this plane is well understood, and airlines are confident that given enough time, passengers will return to flying comfortably and won't even notice what plane they are on. And now that is something to consider. The greater public doesn't know much about plane types, especially compared to aviation enthusiasts like many of my viewers are. They simply don't know the difference between a Boeing 737 MAX and a 737-800, let alone between a Boeing 747 and an Airbus A380. Boeing has decided to retain the Boeing 737 MAX name, stating that it would be a disservice to the brand to ignore its history, and also it would look like it wasn't honouring what happened with the victims of the crashes by changing the name. Airlines have been a little bit more reluctant to send passengers back into the sky with the Boeing 737 MAX, with many delaying the return until well into 2021. This likely has more to do with current market conditions rather than a consideration of customer comforts. In North America, several different airlines are returning the aircraft back into service. American Airlines is leading the way in late December on flights between its Miami hub and New York's LaGuardia Airport.
We know you have lots of choices, so thanks for choosing American.
Fellow mainline carrier United Airlines has said that each of its MAX airplanes will require about 1,000 hours of work and training before it resumes service around the first quarter of 2021. Alaska Airlines, which will take the first of its 32 Boeing 737 MAX aircraft in January, will begin its customer flights in March. Southwest Airlines, the largest MAX customer in North America, plans to resume flying the plane type in the second quarter. Those that have chosen to fly the Boeing 737 MAX will offer passengers ahead of time of the plane type when booking, or if a change in schedule, they will also get that notification as well. Passengers can then choose to fly on the MAX or change for free to a different aircraft type, which is a very nice option to have. Although not all airlines are offering this choice. Ryanair, who will be operating a 200-seater version of the Boeing 737 MAX specially built for them, has said that it is not practical for them to notify passengers ahead of time. Given the scrutiny of the type, the comfort of airlines offering alternatives, and the slow rollout, most passengers won't cross paths with a MAX aircraft unless they seek it out for many more years. Years of time that will allow Boeing to earn back your trust. But for some, that isn't enough, and they will not only never fly on a Boeing 737 MAX, but will also never fly on a Boeing aircraft again. Perhaps this question of whether or not you should fly on the plane is the wrong one to ask. Rather, should Boeing shut down the line entirely and return to the drawing board to create a new clean sheet design? Is this Boeing 737 MAX aircraft ultimately flawed and irredeemable? And is Boeing absolutely unforgivable? While asked, it is a question that is likely beyond what airlines and Boeing are willing to consider, although arguably it would be the best solution for all parties and reminiscent of the fate of the de Havilland Comet. There are also the other types of Boeing 737 MAX aircraft to keep in mind. The Boeing 737 MAX 7, MAX 9, and MAX 10 have not experienced any issues, and they have no track record of any fatalities. They use the same technology as the Boeing 737 MAX 8, and the same changes to the design have been rolled out. When the MAX does return to service and travelers see the aircraft flying safely day after day, the hope is that the fear will fade and most people can go back to forgetting about what aircraft they're flying on, just as it used to be. This video has been written not as a way to promote the Boeing 737 MAX, nor as a way to negate the horrible, tragic events that occurred with Lion Air Flight 610 and Ethiopian Airlines Flight 302. only to show support for the aviation industry as a whole and to promote all things flying. Let me know in the comments below what you think. Will you fly on the plane? And be nice. This is likely to be a very controversial discussion, so remember to be human and reply to each other with dignity. And as always, if you enjoyed this video today, then consider subscribing and joining the Found and Explained crew. Thanks again for watching. The Boeing 747 is the biggest plane produced by the North American aircraft manufacturer. Or is it? It turns out that Boeing has a bigger aircraft called the Boeing Dreamlifter. Created for the express purpose to transport Boeing 787 fuselages, this platform holds the most interior space of any Boeing aircraft. So why don't we put some passengers in it? After all, with more space than even the proposed Boeing 747X, this plane would change the landscape of aviation and commercial freight forever. Let us dive into it. Hey, it's me, Nick here. If this is the 5th, 6th, or 10th video of mine that you're watching, then it's time to subscribe. The Boeing Dreamlifter, proper name the Boeing 747-400 Large Cargo Freighter, is an engineering marvel. Created from the shell of a Boeing 747-400, the Dreamlifter has a greatly expanded internal cargo area that can carry entire plane fuselages across the great American continent and beyond, from smaller Boeing 737s up to Boeing 787 Dreamliners, especially those that can't fit on rail or trucks. Boeing uses them to link its international production line from Japan and Italy to North Charleston and Washington State. It is essentially the Boeing equivalent of the Airbus Beluga. Fascinatingly, and unlike Airbus, these aircraft are not built from scratch, but rather from existing conversions. The 4 Dreamlifters that exist are from Air China, China Airlines, and Malaysia Airlines. Boeing acquired the 747-400s and converted them in Taiwan, hence why all of them come from Asia. The plane's unusual hump appearance and its initial subsequent lack of a paint job, thanks to the urgency required to do flight tests, led the Boeing Commercial Airplanes president Scott Carson to apologize to the 747 designer Joe Sutter, saying, "Sorry for what we did to your plane." So if it's somewhat easy and proven to turn a 747-400 into a Dreamlifter, why don't we do it for passenger operations? We can start by looking at what we have to work with. The Boeing 747 Dreamlifter nearly has all of the same specifications as the 747-400, although it is slightly longer by 1 meter, or 3 feet or so, and it's also significantly taller at 21.5 meters or 70 feet and 8 inches. And it's also wider in the middle at 8.38 meters or 27 and 6 inches, approximately 2 meters more than the 747-400. This gives us a total empty space of 65,000 cubic feet, or 1,840 meters cubed. Let's look at filling this area with seats. We know we can divide up the area into 2 decks, and so if the upper level has a width of 838 centimeters and an average seat is 17 inches across or 43 centimeters, then we can fit a total of 16 seats across, factoring in twin aisles. Now, that's quite complicated as it would mean a configuration of 5-6-5, which is pretty unrealistic, but we could fit in a third row in exchange for an extra seat and end up with a 4-4-4-4. Brutal, but not outrageous. A more realistic option would be 3-4-4-3, giving room for the bulkhead. At 45 rows of passengers on the upper deck, this would be 14 times 45 or 630 economy passengers. But what about the lower deck? The lower level has the same width as the Boeing 747-400, and thus we can assume the same configuration of 3-4-3, across with 17 inches of width. Now for the rows, the plane likewise has a similar lower level, and we can assume around 45 rows, giving us 450 passengers on the lower deck if all economy. In combination, this is just over 1,000 passengers, or 1,070 souls. There would likely be room for business class passengers. Looking at how Lufthansa laid out its 747-400 series, they reduced the economy down to 308 and 53 business class seats on the lower deck, bringing out a new realistic total with two classes to 811 on our Dreamlifter concept. Still insane and still bigger than the A380. But let's say we filled up the plane. Would it even be able to take off? The great thing about the 747 Dreamlifter is that it actually has the existing power of the 747-400 and is a preferred aircraft for cargo operations. With these four engines, the Dreamlifter has a range of 4,200 nautical miles or 7,800 kilometers, fully loaded with a maximum payload capacity of 250,000 pounds or 113,000 kilograms, which makes it much more useful for passengers than, say, the impossible Beluga XL, which you can see right here. So let's crank out those calculators and start by figuring out how much all of these passengers weigh. If we were to say that the average person on Earth weighed 200 pounds for a male or 170 pounds for a female, this will start to give us a pretty good idea of how much our payload will weigh. This may seem like quite a lot of weight compared to other countries in the world, but then again in the USA there are 24-hour buffets and their child soda size is the size of a child. With 811 passengers on board, roughly divided 50-50, this would be an average weight of 83.5 kilograms per person, for a total of 67,718,000 tons, or 149.2 thousand pounds. That's half our weight gone from the maximum payload. With the other half, we still need to include luggage, say 20 kilograms per person, so that's 16,000 kilograms or 35,000 pounds, giving us only 29.4 thousand kilos for the rest of the plane. The bulkheads, the seats, the toilets, the entertainment systems, food, beverages, you name it, it all adds up. We might not even have enough for the second deck, unless we cut back on passengers, cargo or more. Perhaps with more powerful and efficient engines like the GE9X, we might be able to carry 811 passengers, but it is impossibly tight. I'll leave it up to the maths wizards in the comments to come up with a final passenger conclusion, but at any rate, this plane could probably carry 100 to 200 less passengers, but in far more comfort than any other plane flying today, sans private jets, thanks to its truly enormous legroom. Well, kind of. You see, there are some flaws with this aircraft that we also need to factor in. First of all, the main cabin is totally unpressurized, as in everyone on board would be freezing in flight and wouldn't even be able to breathe. This would require equipment to keep the passengers comfortable, or at least heavy coats to keep them warm. Plus, there are no windows currently installed in the fuselage, and any new design would either require them or TV screens to fake it, both adding tremendous weight. That being said, there are some unsung advantages of this plane. For one, at airports, this aircraft could simply open up its tail when at the gate and allow many passengers to board and leave instantly, saving plenty of costs and time at a turnaround. Because this plane also has the footprint of the 747-400, it can already fit into most airports around the world, especially those that are already set up for the 747 series. Unlike the Airbus A380 or other aircraft designs like turning the Antonov 225 into a passenger plane, this aircraft wouldn't require any special gates. It is also possible that the plane could be turned into a combi aircraft and be used for passengers on the top deck and commercial freight and cargo on the bottom deck, a tantalizing prospect for airlines in 2021 who require commercial freight to survive. After all, the Boeing 747-400 was actually used as a combi aircraft by KLM for many years for its trans-Caribbean routes from Europe. Overall, the Dreamlifter really just shows us how flexible the actual 747 platform really is. It is incredible that not only do we have multiple generations of passenger 747s, but also all of these insanely wacky designs like the 747 missile carrier and the 747 Dreamlifter. It is for these reasons that while we might be saying goodbye to trijets, goodbye to the A380, the 747 Queen of the Skies will be sticking around for a bit longer yet. Thank you so much for watching today's video. I could have not done it without the help from my Patreons and those who have supported me right from the beginning when I was a monorail channel. Thank you so much. Plus, I'd like to say check out www.foundandexplained.com for more in-depth articles, 3D models, and also some quizzes to test your knowledge. Have fun! This commercial aircraft is unlike anything you have ever seen. It's made from the same materials as the SR-71, and it goes fast without creating a sonic boom. Back in the early 2000s, Boeing needed a new ace in the hole to take on their rising European competitor, Airbus. An aircraft so futuristic and outside the box thinking that they would never be challenged again. But getting there would be nearly impossible, limited by both the aviation industry and the laws of physics. This was to be Boeing's secret weapon to destroy the Airbus A380, but the project was cancelled just over a year and a half after its reveal. To celebrate 300,000 subscribers, let's re-explore the incredible Boeing Sonic Cruiser. Flying higher than a commercial aircraft at 40,000 feet, this futuristic aircraft was made for a totally new world of aviation. A visionary fantasy of lunch in one country and dinner in another, facilitated by Boeing's new aircraft. The first biggest advantage of this aircraft, and its namesake, was its speed. The Boeing Sonic Cruiser was designed to be a subsonic or transonic aircraft, flying just under the speed of sound, around 10 to 20% faster than a normal jet aircraft we have today. For those people who love maths, this would be around Mach 0.95 to 0.98, which is 650 miles per hour or just over 1,000 kilometers per hour. Because it's below the sound barrier, there would be no sonic boom. And no boom means no problems. I'll point out that the Concorde could fly faster than this, but was heavily restricted due to those very same sonic booms. Over long distances, this extra 20% of the Sonic Cruiser's speed made a big difference. For example, a conventional flight between London and Singapore would take 13 hours and 10 minutes. With the Boeing Sonic Cruiser, the flight only took just over 11 hours. But its main target market was the transatlantic London to New York route. Typically, flights here last around 7 hours and 55 minutes, but for Boeing's secret weapon, it would have been able to do it in 6 hours and 10 minutes, ignoring any slowing down for landings or takeoff. Whilst not a huge improvement over the Concorde, who doesn't want to get somewhere faster if they can? Going fast would also mean that the Boeing Sonic Cruiser would have to fly at a higher altitude than other aircraft, over 40,000 feet, for better flight conditions and avoiding those snail-pace airliners like the Airbus A380. And this is the beauty of the aircraft design. It was future-proof. Boeing saw that the way things were going, it knew that passengers were more interested in going point to point as quickly as possible rather than through airline hubs. Why travel to Boston via New York when a direct flight on a smaller, faster plane could get you there quicker? It's just common sense. People want to go where they want to go, when they want to go, and how they want to go. Boeing's answer to the demand for faster flights, more direct flights, and increased comfort is the Boeing Sonic Cruiser. This was the exact opposite of the Airbus A380, which was made for hub-to-hub travel, and as we know now, looking back in the last 20 years, Boeing was right about point-to-point travel. But the traveling point of the Sonic Cruiser wasn't right for Boeing. But I'll get to that little nugget in a minute. But first, I want to show you what it would have been like to be on board the Boeing Sonic Cruiser. The faster than an Airbus Sonic Cruiser would be 250 feet long and would have a wingspan of 164.9 feet. It would use a delta wing arrangement and would use canards in place of a tail. The wingspan would be similar to a Boeing 767, but the wing area would be nearly twice as large, meaning a much shorter takeoff distance. Both engines would be buried in the wing, so no pylons would be necessary. The exhaust nozzle would be located behind the trailing edge of the wing to eliminate jet interference. The engines themselves were not noted, but expected to be Super Cruise ones derived from, at then, military engines. Boeing assumed that at the time that the Sonic Cruiser would be ready for market, civil versions of the military Super Cruise engines would be ready. In fact, it was that point that Boeing really wanted to emphasize at the Paris Air Show in 2001, when they brought the aircraft to the world. The Sonic Cruiser is a brand new class of flying machine. Everything else has just been a refinement of the Boeing 707. And that had logic to it. If you're going to make a plane faster, then you need to change the wing. If you change the wing, then you need to change the tail. And if you change the tail, well, by the end, you have something radically different. So on board, it would be able to carry 200 to 250 passengers in a range between 6,000 to 10,000 nautical miles. The plan was to offer different models depending on the requirements of the airline, much like they do today with the Boeing 787 and the Boeing 777X, one with larger capacity for shorter routes and a long-haul one that could do the distance. On board, there would have been a business class cabin with a 2-2 configuration and an economy cabin with a 2-3-2 configuration. But you know it was optimistic, as if United wouldn't give you as much space for the legroom and crank it well beyond 250 passengers. At airports, it would be boarded through the middle of the plane, behind the front canards, with the main entrance and exit separating a first class and business class cabins. To achieve this design, the Sonic Cruiser would have been built with an advanced composite of titanium and ceramics, similar to some of the development of the SR-71, although that link is tentative. At the time, most aircraft were using full metal bodies and were quite heavy, especially when you look at Boeing's rival, the Airbus A380. This composite structure would have been able to reduce the airframe weight by around 70%. This made the aircraft one of the most fuel efficient in the world at the time, something it definitely needed as the fuel burn would be extreme at Mach 0.98, which is a hint for what's coming next. Boeing announced the Sonic Cruiser just after the Airbus A380 at the Paris Air Show to try and upstage their competitor, and got some early interest from American Airlines and Virgin Atlantic for use across the Atlantic Ocean. I truly believe this airplane will change the way the world flies. We expect to order between 3 and 6 aircraft. Alan Mulally, Boeing's commercial airplanes boss, said at the reveal, "Can it be done? Absolutely. Can we do it economically? Absolutely. And is it the right thing to do for the travelers of the world? Absolutely. But as you'll see in a moment, this faster sonic fantasy was just that, a fantasy. The Boeing Sonic Cruiser project only lasted 18 months. It was initially pitched to airlines leading up to the Paris Air Show in 2001 as a radical alternative to the stable of current jet offerings, as well as to draw away attention from Airbus. But unlike the Airbus A380 project, which was a fully realized plan with schematics and a decade of research, which you can watch actually right now on how it evolved on my channel, and the Boeing Sonic Cruiser could fit completely on a napkin, which it probably did at one of the Boeing executive luncheons. Later, it became apparent that Boeing had boasted all sorts of stats about the Sonic Cruiser, but hadn't actually undertaken any research on the airline market. For one, the Sonic Cruiser wasn't a new idea at all. Obviously, there had been the Concorde, the 2144, as well as various other supersonic test platforms, and they all agreed you either go supersonic or not at all. Even Convair had tried themselves with the Convair 990 to much failure. Consistent experience of supersonic flight was that you didn't want to cruise at Mach 0.98. Cruising at a faster speed would actually reduce drag and be far more fuel efficient. The Sonic Cruiser would burn far more fuel to not really go that much faster at all, and that was a cost that couldn't be written off.
Oh, and who pays for it?
Nobody. You write it off.
Who writes it off?
I don't know. The write-off people. Why are we having this conversation?
Boeing assumed that people would be willing to pay a premium to get somewhere a little bit faster, but remember at the time the Concorde was still flying and struggling with capacity. Thus, this was a very big if. So if the business case didn't really make much sense, what about the plane itself? There was some doubt about the capacity of the aircraft to fly further than 6,000 nautical miles. While the maths checks out for trips under that, it starts to fall apart, and a flight to 10,000 nautical miles at the speed and fuel burn doesn't make physical sense. I'll link to the research below if you want to see the numbers for yourself. And let's also talk about that thing that was on all the banners, that 20% faster flight time. A 20% decrease would take a 3,000 nautical flight mile journey from 6.3 hours to 5.3 hours. Impressive on paper, but that only works if the flight themselves can maintain speed throughout takeoff and landings, including the extra long descent from 40,000 feet. Thus, these 20% gains would be wiped out if the plane has to fit in with other commercial traffic, even if it can cruise at top pace. And across the Atlantic, that would be an issue. Unless the Sonic Cruiser was first to cross the first oceanic waypoint, it would be trapped flying the same speed as the slowest aircraft in front of it. Back then in the early 2000s, the North Atlantic track system did not allow much flexibility. And insult to injury, that speed was also a double-edged sword. Initial modeling showed, with no traffic ahead, that the Sonic Cruiser would arrive over the Atlantic before the airports even opened in America. Richard Branson summed it up perfectly. Unless more runways are built, the Sonic Cruiser is going to struggle because airlines will not have the slots to use the aircraft. After all these numbers, it's either the same as a commercial passenger jet we have today, or you go faster with a supersonic jet. A jack of all trades is a master of none. Lastly, the timing was terrible. In 2001, the aviation industry took a big hit following the 9/11 attacks, and demand for new aircraft, especially unproven aircraft, fell. But believe it or not, that was not the end of the project. Despite the plane not looking great on paper, the research itself had proved very fruitful. During development, they hit a snag with the delta wing design. It made accessing the rear of the aircraft difficult for service trucks and unloading passengers, and thus Boeing designed a version of the Sonic Cruiser that had a more typical wing like we see today. But taking away the wing of the Sonic Cruiser doesn't make it very Sonic at all, and when the project was cancelled, Boeing fell back to this earlier design to revise it further. They labelled it Project Yellowstone, or the 7E7, with an E for efficiency. It would no longer have the sonic speed, but it would burn 20% less fuel than any other aircraft in the market, at least compared to the Boeing 767, and shift the aviation model away from hub to hub to point to point. The Boeing 7E7 would be further refined into the Boeing 787 that we know and love today. 20 years on, we can see which was more successful. The Airbus A380 has been shut down with little to no second-hand market, and the Boeing 787 is still going strong with over 1,000 built and 1,490 ordered. A final footnote is that Boeing actually updated the Sonic Cruiser patent in 2012. It was based off research done in part with NASA on a future high-speed civil transport concept, made to carry 100 passengers close to the speed of sound to 6,000 nautical miles. Sound familiar? It was called the Boeing 765, and not to be a tease, but that's a video for another day. So let me know if you want to see it by clicking that subscribe button, and I'll see you in the next video. Thanks for watching, and thanks to my patrons. In 1955, Boeing invited airlines to witness what they described as history in the making. A new type of passenger plane. It's like never seen before. But instead of a simple tour and flyby, the test pilot did a series of impromptu maneuvers that left everybody watching on the ground godsmacked. Twin barrel rolls at 490 miles per hour, proving not only the military performance of this new aircraft, but that the age of the jetliner had truly arrived. This barrel roll would cement the story of the first Boeing jetliner for generations and herald in a new era for aviation transport. But the story of the Dash 80 and its production model is fraught with fear, cunning, and possibly the biggest risk ever. For you see, Boeing would bet the entire company on building a fully functioning prototype without any orders. This is the incredible story of the miracle plane, the first Boeing 707. After the end of World War II, the jet engine was seen as the next great leap in aircraft technology. Planes could fly further, faster, and higher than ever before, and it would only be a matter of time before the technology made its way to the civil market. The first on the scene was the United Kingdom with the de Havilland Comet.
Another success story is about to begin with de Havilland Comet as the title.
Completely redesigned from the earlier models after a series of crashes in which 110 were killed.
Unfortunately, there were well-publicized flaws with the design that led to several crashes and loss of life, causing the public to reject the press's obsession with the technology. But the barrier had been broken, and several firms were now examining their own take on a new-fangled jetliner. Boeing, with experience themselves building large jet aircraft like the B-47 only a few years before, realized that they had the technology and the prime position to build the first American jetliner. And this was a huge deal. While Boeing was successful in the military market, it struggled with the civil market for some time. Its competitor, Douglas, had orders in spades for piston aircraft like the Douglas DC-4 and DC-6, which it had refined over many years, and airlines couldn't quite understand why they would need one powered by jet engines instead.
This is the story of a few weeks in the life of an airplane.
of a very particular airplane. One of the planes which is changing the whole idea of air travel and transport. A big, reliable Douglas DC-6.
So Boeing decided that the best way would be to show, not tell, and build the aircraft of the future. But building a new jetliner from scratch wouldn't be easy, and Boeing would need to take out multiple loans and favors to do so. They set aside $16 million, the equivalent of $154 million today, with no committed customers, just a handshake from Pan Am. The project would get the juicy name of the Boeing 367-80, but would be called -80 within the company almost right away, and it would borrow heavily from other large aircraft designs such as the KC-97 Stratofreighter, such as the pod engines under the wings and the same swept wing. A wing which would allow, by the way, the plane to fly faster than any of the other competition in development, such as the DC-8. Initially, the plane was going to be as wide as the KC-97, allowing 5 seats across the cabin, but the CEO of American Airlines at the time, C.R. Smith, said that he wouldn't even consider buying it unless they could pack in 6 seats, making this already large aircraft even bigger. To really punch out the cabin experience, Boeing would then hire industrial design firms from outside the company to create the new jet-age interiors, a first for the industry. By early 1952, the board of directors was confident enough with the design to go public, and they revealed the production model as the Boeing 707. While the name today is quite revered, back then it was a simple escalation of the next product line for Boeing. The Boeing 300 being passenger prop planes, the 400, 500, and 600 series already used by missiles and other products, so Boeing decided that jets would bear the 700 series numbers. The 707 was chosen over the 700 simply because they liked the ring of it. But building an aircraft is one thing, selling it is another. 18 months later, the plane was ready to pitch. Boeing started to do test flights, with the first taking to the sky in July 15, 1954. As it was built by hand, yes, the whole plane, it could be custom built for any specifications. As Boeing was gunning for a military tanker contract at the same time, they would fly the new -80 with a refueling boom attached to show off its capability, and eventually win the contract, calling it the KC-135. You can of course check out all about the project here on my good friend's channel, Pilot Photog, and I'll have a link down in the description. With the military application sound, it was now time to approach the civil market. Bill Allen, the chairman of Boeing at the time, realized that plenty of aviation stakeholders would be at the Seafair Cup Unlimited hydroplane race in Seattle. If he could get permission to run the new -80 over the audience, it would not only prove that the concept was ready to go, but also give them a huge media boost. He had no idea what was about to happen. The test pilot of the -80, Tex Johnston, wanted to prove just how insane this new aircraft was by performing a series of high turns and a barrel roll. While impressive, a barrel roll doesn't have any more G-forces than a normal flight, and thus was relatively safe, but still of course would risk a multi-million-dollar aircraft. On his first pass over the event, Johnston, without informing anybody on the ground or even on board, performed the maneuver. The crowd went ballistic. Then after turning around, he performed it again. I knew that no one would believe what they had seen, so I turned around and I came back and repeated the same thing on a westerly heading. When he landed, he was summoned to Allen and explained that the process was harmless. In reply, all he got was,
"You know that now, we know that, but just don't do it anymore."
But this barrel roll would cement the future of the 707, and the extreme performance would put the public at ease to pressure problems that plagued the Halavan Comet years earlier. And then the orders started to flow. With the prototype a big success and deals in their back pocket, Boeing went on to produce the first production model, the 707-120, on December 20th, 1957, with it being certified and entering into service with Pan American in 1958. And seriously, I cannot overstate just how much of a big deal this aircraft was for the world of aviation. Almost right away, the aircraft changed the way we travel a long distance, taking over trains and boats for that coveted top prize. Over the years, many airlines would expand with the 707, and importantly, it also outpaced the rival DC-8 when it came to sales. I mean, ask yourself, have you heard of Boeing or have you heard of Douglas?
But 6534 will never grow old. She will always be a new airplane.
And Boeing would continue to improve on this design, creating a bespoke version for its first international sales to my very own Qantas, who would operate the aircraft for its long overseas flights, as well as a shorter version for short-haul flights called the Boeing 720. This plane was a huge success for the company, with 110 aircraft being built over the course of the aircraft's run. The only reason it was stopped was that Boeing was a victim of their own success. Essentially, passengers were hungry for bigger and better planes. Boeing now had to deliver, and the 707 was now just too small. But the story of the Boeing 707 successor, I think, is best left for another day. Of course, the 707 wasn't the only aircraft that Boeing built with the Dash 80 prototype, but also the incredible air refueling tanker, the KC-135. My good friend Pilot Photog has a fantastic video that you can go watch right here, right now. Special thanks to all the Patreons who made this video possible. The Boeing 2707 was the answer to the Concorde. It could carry more passengers, fly further, and at a speed that left rival European creations in its wake. But Boeing's version of a supersonic aircraft would never make it to the market and leave behind a legacy of failure. In today's video, we will answer what was the Boeing 2707, what would it have been like inside, and why it was never built. In the early 60s, America always considered itself at the forefront of aviation technology. While it had been beaten to the market for the world's first jet-powered commercial transport, its Boeing 707 had cemented its place as the gold standard of aviation travel. But the times were changing. New military technology had opened up the possibility of faster-than-sound commercial aircraft, turning all-day flights into mere hours, allowing passengers to eat a meal in one hemisphere before catching the same sunset in another. Countries around the world, excited by this possibility, were getting to work on their own supersonic designs. When it became clear that the European Concorde would go ahead, with the dreaded Soviets right behind, the American government gave a signal for local builders to start work on what would become the homegrown version of the Concorde. Then President John F. Kennedy tasked the FAA with preparing a report on national aviation goals for the period between now and 1970. This report highlighted that supersonic transports, or SSTs, would be the market that America couldn't afford to miss. In fact, many believed that the future lay in supersonic transport, and aircraft designs like the Boeing 747 would only be a passing fad. The race was on to build the first American Concorde. Designing an American version of the Concorde would require several different mission factors. The aircraft would need to fly between Western Europe and Eastern USA without stopping to refuel, with a range of at least 3,500 nautical miles, or 6,400 kilometers. It would also need to bring traveling fast to the masses and have a seating capacity of at least 150 passengers, meaning that this bad boy would be significantly bigger than the planned European counterpart. But unlike their European counterpart, America had a trick up its sleeve. The Concorde design was built around a lightweight traditional aluminum alloy airframe. Whilst this had been great for heavier-than-air commercial airliners, it didn't lend itself to speed, and many engineers at the time believed that Mach 1.8 was the fastest an aluminum SST could ever go. America, on the other hand, had experience with other materials like titanium. A titanium airframe had been used on the famous military A-12 Blackbird, which had an estimated top speed of Mach 3.35 at 85,000 feet, significantly faster than the final Concorde design of Mach 2.04. Thus, this American Concorde design would need to be built from a titanium structure, and lack of a better phrase, leave the rival Concorde back in its wake. The US government would launch a contest between 3 different SST projects, one from Boeing, one from Lockheed, and one from North American Aviation. Yes, the very same guys who designed the rescue missions to the moon in that very early video of mine that you can see right here. Proceeding through development, the first to be struck off the list was the North American Aviation NAC-60 design. It didn't make it because it was deemed too small and too slow to beat the Concorde. Lockheed's version would be called the L2000 and seat over 273 passengers in the biggest and loudest SST project to date. The Boeing effort would be called the Boeing Model 733-197, but the public nickname of the Boeing 707 would stick. It would have a variable geometry wing, which gave the airframe the ability to take off and land at lower speeds and in a less distance than a comparable fixed-wing aircraft. Plus, it would be quieter too. Boeing would go on to update this design twice, essentially making it bigger every time until it could seat 277 passengers in 2 classes. This version would be called the 2707-100. In 1966, the 2 remaining designs, the 2707 and L2000, went head-to-head, with the Boeing 2707 ultimately winning the contract in 1967. Lockheed's L2000 was judged simpler to produce and less risky for investors, but its performance was slightly lower and its noise level significantly higher. But we'll do a full video on this design in the future. With the approval and a fat purse, Boeing got to work. Its design for the aircraft would go through several iterations, with a Dash 200 model having canards at the front of the plane. Boeing would work hard on implementing its variable geometry wing, or the swing wing design. However, the titanium joint to actually swing the wings out proved too heavy and was abandoned in favor for the traditional Delta V design. This new version would be called the Boeing 2707-300 and seat only 234 passengers, and would cost the program 2 years in delays, which coming up you'll see is very important. Even before this concept was out of the gate, airlines were jumping on board to have a more advanced than the Concorde Boeing SST in their fleet. By October 1969, there were orders for 122 Boeing SSTs by 26 airlines, including Air Italia, Delta Airlines, Iberia, KLM, Northwest Airlines, and World Airways. The future was here. So the question is, what would have it been like to fly on board the Boeing 2707? To say this plane wasn't advanced was an understatement. It was one of the earliest wide-body aircraft designs to have two aisles, with a 2-3-2 road seating arrangement at its widest section, with the seats getting smaller as the body tapered off. In the original mock-up that Boeing built to win the contract, it had both overhead storage for smaller items with restraining nets, as well as large drop-in bins between sections of the aircraft in the bulkhead, like on a long-distance train. In the main economy cabin, there were retractable televisions placed on every sixth row in the overhead storage, while in the area, every pair of seats included smaller televisions in a console between the seats, something that no other airline had at the time. The cabin had tiny windows with only 6 inches wide due to the high altitudes that the aircraft flew at, maximizing the pressure on them, but the internal plane was 12 inches to give an illusion of size. These windows would also use rotating polarization to dim instead of shutters, an idea that wouldn't come back until the Boeing 787 decades later. Boeing was confident they would start construction on the prototypes in early 1967, with the first flight planned in early 1970. Insiders even believed that the first Boeing and we very well could be right on the edge of a brand new way to travel. Of course, I personally am holding out for one of those Star Trek inspired teleporters.
Enterprise. Transporter room energized.
Thanks so much for watching the video today. If you have an idea for the next video on the channel, hit me up down in the comments below and chat. I do actually read all of the comments on the channel, both good and bad, so don't feel like you're being unread. And if you want to support the channel more, I have a Patreon where you can go behind the scenes, see videos when they come out early, live streams, and then there's also some other great perks as well. Thank you again so much for watching.